It's Friday, October 25th, 2024, and Fridays are Ask or Tell Me Anything, next on the AM Update. It is my favorite day of the week, Friday. Ask or tell me anything. Always a joy to hear from you and talk to each other. That's always my highlight of the week, at least on the AM Update in terms of show prep and content calendar for the week. Appreciate each and every one of you who submitted questions. If you would like to submit a question for Ask Izzy, that's going to be next Saturday on No Sucks Saturday. Ask a nurse who knows. Anything about healthcare, medicine, both old and new. My wife is a smart cookie. She can probably help you out. You can ask those questions. AskIzzyNSS@gmail.com. AskIzzyNSS@gmail.com. We've already received several submissions, but we'd like to hear from you. Ask Izzy, I-Z-Z-Y, AskIzzyNSS@gmail.com. That's coming up not this Saturday, but next Saturday on No Sucks Saturday. For all of you Apple Podcast subscribers, we do have a fresh episode of No Sucks Saturday coming up your way tomorrow morning. But first, as always, it is Ask or Tell Me Anything. You can ask me any question you want. Tell me any news story you think needs covered. And we'll begin with this from Dan T. This is I don't know how you spin this other than a really good story out of the People's Republic of California. He sends in this story from ABC 7 News. A federal jury has sided with fired Bay Area rapid transit workers who sued the agency, saying they lost their jobs over a COVID vaccine mandate. There are 6 of them in total, and the lawsuit, and each will receive more than $1 million. The employees claimed religious exemptions to the vaccine mandate, but say they were not accommodated by the transit agency and subsequently lost their job. BART did initially grant vaccine exemptions, but the plaintiffs argued they weren't accommodated. An accommodation would have meant they were able to work from home or get COVID tested regularly. They argued none of that happened, and they lost their job. So, good news. You know, usually I'm not one who is a huge fan of the overly litigious nature of this country. To me, this is not litigious enough, and yet they're getting $1 million. So, hats off to them. They deserve that. Nobody deserved to get fired for refusing the COVID jabs. A really random side note. I was driving home through Des Moines, Iowa on Interstate 35 a few weeks ago. And on a wide load bed, flatbed, tractor trailer, was a Bay Area rapid transportation, what do you call it? A train carriage. It was one of those people carriers they have on. Do they have a subway system in San Francisco or the elevated rail system? But yeah, driving through Des Moines, Iowa, I saw one of those on the back of a tractor trailer. And I did some digging, and I found out that those are actually manufactured in, I think it's Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, or somewhere out east in Pennsylvania. And the route that they have to take to get them out to San Francisco goes right through Des Moines. So one thing that I did not expect to see was a Bay Area rapid transportation carriage going through randomly in Des Moines, Iowa, but I did see that. I don't know why I felt like I needed to include that, but seems somewhat tangentially relevant to that story, that good news story out of California. Steve Setti says now that Kalshi won in court and election betting is legal, should we be watching the betting odds right before the election? I fear that powerful people with tons of capital will make wagers knowing there's a fix, and with Harris down in the markets, could make huge profits off this. Absolutely, you should be watching the betting markets, especially the day of the election. Now, I don't know if this is true or not. I saw some Frenchman. He wagered like 20, 30 some odd $1 million via, I think it was maybe Polymarket, on Donald Trump to win. Now, there has been a thought out there that there are a lot of whales. These are bettors who move markets. That's what whales are. Or just any market mover is a whale. And this thought is out there that there's people who really think that Kamala is going to win are trying to move the market towards Trump so that they can buy back Kamala at the last moment for maximum profit. Well, the market has moved so much towards Trump over the last few weeks especially. My comeback to that comeback is, why isn't there already some Kamala buyback? You're probably going to be getting her at the best price you're going to be able to get her at anyway. So, but notwithstanding, Steve, your point is absolutely true. We should absolutely be watching the betting markets the day before and definitely the day of. If you start seeing rapid movement back towards Kamala, it's going to be a long election night / season. Let's go to this. Bama conservative. If Trump wins, what do you think will be his signature accomplishment? His first term as justices that overturned Roe and tax cuts. Will he start to reform the administrative state? Well, I certainly hope that that is the ultimate goal. And I've never really held to this notion before, as others have, that this was necessarily going to be a lame duck term from Trump. I think it's going to look a whole lot like his first term. There's going to be some good stuff. There's going to be some bad stuff. There's going to be some head-scratching stuff. I certainly hope he is more wise this time around, because the first few weeks of his presidency, he went around trying to, don't you like me now? Don't you like me? You know, I'm not going to throw Hillary Clinton in prison. Now he's talking about, I am going to pardon. I'm not dismissing the idea of pardoning Hunter Biden. I hope that he has learned that everybody in Washington, D.C., for the most part, are snakes. You don't try to make snakes like you. No. They're snakes for a reason, and treat them accordingly. I hope he is certainly wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove in his second administration. But I just think it's going to look a lot, if he wins, it's just going to look a lot like his first administration. Now, I think the X factor is what the deep state will try to throw at him this time. Last time it was, via the medical industrial complex. It was COVID in his last year, of course. Is it going to be the longshoremen's strike? Is it going to be basically the Rube Goldberg machine that is our central banking system? Are we going to pull the plug on that as soon as we possibly can and bring this entire economy crashing down? Is it going to be that? I don't know. I think if he actually follows through on mass deportations, even starting with the criminals, as J.D. Vance said in the VP debate, they're going to make that really difficult for him. So I'm banking a lot of my optimism on hope here. I guess you could call it hopium if you wanted to. Elliot Evans asks, what are your thoughts on the abortion amendment here in Missouri, passing or not? I've seen a lot of opposition to it here in Southwest Missouri, from lots of no yard signs to many churches, including my own, coming out against it. I'm slightly optimistic because of that. Well, I'm more optimistic just from a macro environment standpoint. I'm more optimistic for this and other amendments around the country, but especially in Missouri, a place like Missouri. I think outside of Utah, it still has the largest contingent of weekly church attenders in the country. I'm more optimistic because of the overall environment for the right side of the aisle in this country that I'm seeing develop, or I think I'm seeing develop here in the closing weeks before the election. So I have not seen really any polling on this in Missouri. I've seen some polling on Amendment 4 in Florida. Some of that I detailed earlier this week on the AM update, but I haven't seen much polling. But I will say I am slightly more optimistic just because of the overall environment nationally for your state specifically. T. Roy asks, how would you explain knowing the beginning from the end juxtaposed by self-will? I'm in the Chuck Missler camp, but I just wanted to hear your thoughts. So I wasn't quite sure what you were asking at first blush. I happened to be hanging out with a buddy of mine last night, and so I read him your question, and so we watched a little Chuck Missler video. I don't know every jot and tittle of Missler's, and I'm not that familiar with him at all. It kind of rings a bell now. It didn't when I first read your question, but we kind of familiarized ourselves with him in passing, and I think I understand your question. I think maybe that's Chuck Missler's term for free will, but how do you explain knowing the beginning from the end juxtaposed by free will? So I think I'm going to answer this the way I think you're asking, and I may be misunderstanding it, and feel free to come back at me and correct whatever presuppositions I'm missing or putting in there that you didn't intend. But I think what you're asking is, how is it possible that God can know the end or the beginning from the end if we have free will? Now, I don't know what exactly. I think I understand Missler's position on this based on what we watched. But here's what I would say. Even as a Calvinist, do I believe that we have free will? I don't think so in terms of our salvation. That's predestined. But in terms of free will otherwise, yeah, we do. Does God know every decision that we are going to make, that we made, and that we will make in the future? Yes. Are those two things at odds with each other? No. Why? Because he's God. And he exists outside of time and space. And it is paradoxical. But I come back to, when it comes to Calvinism, Arminianism, Calminianism, Isnism, my rubric is whatever glorifies to my finite brain, whatever glorifies God the most, that's what I'm going to err on the side of. Or whatever I think, in humility, as best as I can muster with my fallen mind, whatever glorifies God the most is the side that I'm going to err on. And in this particular question, with what I think you're asking, how does God know the beginning from the end if we all have self-will or free will? I'm going to err on the side of this is paradoxical in nature, and our finite minds cannot comprehend how God could comprehend that. So that's kind of where I fall down on that. I think that glorifies God the most because it's extolling him in his omnipresence and omniscience. So hopefully that kind of answers your question. I don't know if I did or not. There is this passage, the aforementioned buddy sent to me from Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, and I want to read this for you, at least in passing here. The Christians said that the eternal God, who is everywhere and keeps the whole universe going, once became a human being. Well then, said I, how did the whole universe keep going while he was a baby or while he was asleep? How could he at the same time be God who knows everything and also a man asking his disciples, who touched me? You'll notice that the sting lay in the time words, while he was a baby. How could he at the same time? In other words, I was assuming that Christ's life as God was in time, and that his life as the man Jesus in Palestine was a shorter period taken out of that time, just as my service in the army was a shorter period taken out of my total life. And that is how most of us perhaps tend to think about it. We picture God as living through a period when his human life was still in the future, then coming to a period when it was in the present, and then going on to a period when he could look back on it as something in the past. But probably these ideas corresponded to nothing in the actual facts. You cannot fit Christ's earthly life in Palestine, I should say, into any real time or time relations with his life as God beyond all space and time. It really, I suggest, is a timeless truth about God that human nature and the human experience of weakness and sleep and ignorance are somehow included in his whole divine life. This human life in God, as is from our point of view, a particular period in history of our world from the year 81 till the crucifixion, we therefore imagine it as also a period in the history of God's own existence, but God has no history. He is too completely and utterly real to have one. That's kind of getting at the heart of what I'm talking about here. We try to put our own human machinations, our own human box around God too often. And I think that maybe gets to the heart of T. Roy, what you're talking about there. So that's a good question. I appreciate that. It made me think a little bit. Tiny Johnny asks, what's the best thing about your marriage you did not anticipate before getting married? Everything. Everything. I really cringe now when I see people see or talk about, getting married is going to be the hardest thing you do. Yeah, I mean, there's some getting used to it in the first year. But the biggest thing about marriage that I didn't anticipate is that everything gets easier. Everything, actually. It's easier to have a friend around all the time. It's easier to keep the house clean, even if you're splitting up duties because there's two of you doing it. It's easier to cook because there's two of you doing it. Or in my case, Bella loves to cook, so it's just she's doing it, so I don't have to cook for myself anymore. The obvious is a lot easier. Having, iron sharpening iron, that's easier. Your life just gets easier. There are things that are challenges that come along, but I can't imagine doing life without Bella right now, or ever. So that's the biggest thing. I really cringe when I see people that, this marriage is going to be the hardest thing you ever do, but it's going to be the best thing. They mean well, I'm sure. But it really, honestly, most things in life get a lot easier, or have gotten a lot easier after getting married. That's just me, though. Chad Miller has this story. The September 2024 update to the Department of Defense Directive 5240.01 significantly expands military powers, raising concerns about government overreach in domestic law enforcement, like between November 4th and January 6th, 2024. Are they getting ready for something nefarious? Chad, I would have just dismissed out of hand, even in the midst of what I've seen in this country, beginning with COVID. I still would have dismissed what you said out of hand. I thought you were getting that from the Gateway Pundit or Alex Jones or somewhere else. Now, notwithstanding, I've seen this reported at a number of locations. This Department of Defense directive that supposedly allows the military to fire upon U.S. citizens on U.S. soil. But I still would have dismissed this out of hand as a paranoid delusions of somebody who needs to be in the loony bin. And then, all of a sudden, the Kamala campaign, starting with Tim Walz, just conjured out of nowhere. I don't know where this came from. I mean, this preceded the Atlantic hit piece this week. Out of nowhere, they've talked about how Trump wants to take over the army and use it against American citizens. Now, I totally believe they have something nefarious planned. Based on what you just said, the Department of Defense Directive 52401.01, and the fact that all the leftist does is project their worst instincts upon their opponents, which is what they have done. So the Kamala Harris-Biden administration issues this directive saying the United States Armed Forces apparently can open fire on American citizens on American soils. And then all of a sudden, the Kamala campaign, starting with Tim Walz, starts talking about how Trump wants to do that to American citizens, even though they're the ones that are actually perpetrating this directive. So I'm sure this is all just a coincidence, Chad. All right. Let's do one more. Let's go to Uncomfortably Dumb. Is the early voting thing on the right just another trap? If you think about it, wouldn't the left want more of the right to vote early, thereby giving them the more time to fabricate the necessary ballots to win? There are 2 or 3 different directions that I could say this is a setup. And I've seen this postulated on social media a few times, that there, with the polls, the betting market, the early voting numbers, whoever they are setting us up to think that, hey, we got this in the bag. And then when they take it from you at the last minute, that actually provokes a real insurrection, real violence that they can then use to further the J6 narrative or start a new one all over again. And, I'm sympathetic to that. As it pertains to early voting in particular, though, I don't really see... I like the way your brain thinks Uncomfortably Dumb, but I don't really see that happening because I like to think of it this way. I saw this from Will Chamberlain over at the Internet Accountability Project. I don't know if he came up with this or he just retweeted it, but essentially Republicans coming out en masse to the polls in early voting, they're using Democrat voters actually as human shields from Election Day shenanigans. Because now, for the last however many years it's been, Democrats have become accustomed to racking up these early huge leads thanks to early voting. And then on Election Day, when most Republicans historically have shown up to vote, oh crap, the machine's not working today. Oh, there's a pipe burst over there. Oh no, we just had an alien insurrection here. I'm so sorry. Sorry, Kim Jong-un just launched a nuclear missile at this voting site in suburban Maricopa County. Don't you know it's election day? Oh, boy. Any of this could have happened during the 2 weeks leading up during early voting, but it's election day and just golly shucks, all these just series of unfortunate events just happened to hit on election day. You see what I'm saying here? They are accustomed to their voters showing up early, racking up these massive margins, so everything has to work correctly. The machines have to work correctly. The ballots have to be printed correctly. The counters have to be printed correctly. The rolls just magically clean leading up to election day for early voting. So I actually think this time alone, and I hope, I've stated this many times, Donald Trump on virtually every front is just buying us some extra time. I hope when it comes specifically to election integrity, that we don't have to have these stupid conversations anymore. I mean, it's the year 2024. And Maricopa County says it's going to take them 10 to 13 days, or 13 to 14, whatever it was that I had in the AM update yesterday. Almost 2 weeks to count ballots. That's stupid. That's retarded. Even Michigan, it's going to be done by Wednesday night. That's better than Maricopa County. Florida's three times the size of Michigan? When was the last time that it took them more than that night to count their ballots? The land of hanging chads is so good at this now that it takes them one night when it takes Maricopa County alone 2 weeks. Our standards are so low. So, as it pertains to your question, uncomfortably dumb, I don't think early voting necessarily is a trap. You're not actually giving them more time to fabricate necessary ballots, because once election night is over, the clock is ticking. Now, you could come back and say, the fix is in, they're going to take as much time as they want. You're not going to get that much of an argument from me. But when you're racking up margins like Republicans are in some of these places, these are not Democrat-like margins, but it's as good as, given the margins that they have enjoyed in early voting in recent elections. You're making it difficult for them to cheat on two levels. More difficult. I shouldn't say difficult objectively. You're making it more difficult for them to conjure ballots, because on the one hand, the polling narrative, at least right now, less than 2 weeks, almost 1 week away from the election, they don't have the polling narrative to just conjure votes. And number two, I mean, just the raw time and materials that it takes and the coordination and logistics it takes, it becomes harder and harder the bigger the margins are. That's just a physical reality. So I like your paranoid musings, uncomfortably dumb. Do not change. But I think in this particular case, with your particular question, I don't really see that unfolding. But the very fact that we have to have these conversations is stupid. Stupid with two O's. You know what's not stupid with two O's? Country Squire. And we'll end with this. It's okay to be turned off by this election, and frankly, you should be. Amen. But it's not okay to turn your back on your responsibilities, and Country Squire includes a picture of an I voted sticker that he got. You are absolutely right, Country Squire. It's you and people like you that still make this country worth living in and fighting for. You can be disgusted. Don't turn your back on your responsibility, though. So that's a good way to end this week. I appreciate each and every one of you for listening and for submitting questions this week as well. A really good mix of questions. I enjoyed it. I hope you did as well. For all of the Apple Podcast subscribers at the $5 a month level, we're going to have an episode of No Sucks Saturday coming up tomorrow just for you. Next Saturday, it's going to be another edition of Ask Izzy. That's for everybody. And if you have any question you'd like to ask a nurse who knows, any question about what it's like to work in healthcare, what the dynamics are like in healthcare, or any questions about medicine, new and old, you can ask those to my wife. She knows just about everything. You can do that. AskIzzyNSS@gmail.com. AskIzzyNSS@gmail.com. That'll do it for a Friday. Have a wonderful weekend. We'll be back at it again on Monday.